Pack your things and get out. This is our new family's home now. There's no space for you here." My younger sister Katie stood before me with her arms crossed, glaring as she declared those words. Behind her stood her husband, Tom, his parents, Mr. and Mrs. Hanson, and, as if they were her bodyguards, my own parents, who should have been the rightful owners of this house. Every one of them looked at me with that same cold, dismissive gaze, a mixture of blame and relief, as though finally getting rid of a burden. It had only been 6 months since Katie and Tom moved into this house, our family home, to save on rent after their wedding. A month later, Tom's parents showed up saying they'd sold their own home, and before anyone could object, they'd settled themselves into the granny flat behind the house, the one my late grandmother used to live in. Since then, the home I grew up in had become unrecognizable. Tom permanently occupied the living room sofa, blasting the TV at full volume. Whenever I entered the kitchen, Katie would click her tongue. "Oh, I was just about to make a smoothie for Tom," she'd say, like I was intruding. If I waited for my turn in the bathroom, Mrs. Hanson would smirk and ask, "Oh, Lucy, are you in a hurry to go somewhere important?" And my parents? Instead of standing up for me, they had completely taken the side of this new family. Ever since we were kids, they'd spoiled Katie. Selfish, dramatic Katie, while expecting me to be the patient one. They never once scolded her, no matter how much I endured. My father now bonds with Mr. Hanson over golf, while my mother goes shopping with Mrs. Hanson and Katie, excluding me entirely. To them, the eldest daughter they once had seemed to have vanished. So when Katie threw down this final ultimatum today, my heart remained strangely calm. If anything, I thought, finally, it's time. I slowly looked around the room, meeting each of their faces. Not one of them was on my side. They were united in their desire to erase me from this house, and I etched that truth deeply into my mind. "Fine, I'll start packing." My calm response clearly caught them off guard. Katie's eyes widened for a split second before a smug smile curved across her lips. "Good. That's a smart decision, Lucy. Let's make it official. By next weekend, okay?" My parents only looked down, saying nothing. They had no idea. None of them did. They didn't know the truth about this house, or what I had been quietly preparing for years behind their backs. This wasn't just a move, it was the beginning of a long overdue reckoning. The next day, I began packing my belongings in silence. Katie and Tom suddenly walked into my room, laughing, a measuring tape in hand. Without even acknowledging my presence, they began measuring the walls. "This wall will be perfect for the king-size bed, right, Tom?" "Yeah, and over there, that'll be your dressing table, honey." They chatted happily about their future plans as if I had already ceased to exist. I said nothing. I just kept folding, sorting, packing. And then, the night before the move-out deadline Katie had given me, it was a Friday evening. As I sat in my room, I could hear cheerful music and bursts of laughter drifting up from downstairs. Curious, I peered down from the top of the stairs. They were having what could only be described as a farewell party, celebrating my eviction. Katie raised her champagne glass high. "To our new family's beginning, and to my wise sister for stepping aside for our future." At those words, everyone burst into laughter. In that scene, there was no trace of me, the person who had devoted years of my life to this house. I turned away quietly and returned to my room. Taking out my phone, I typed a short message to a single contact. "Everything is ready. Please proceed tomorrow at 10 a.m. as planned." The reply came almost immediately. "Tomorrow will mark the beginning of your new life, Lucy." The next morning, Saturday, I walked into the living room. Everyone was lounging on the sofa, sipping their morning coffee. When they saw me, their chatter stopped, replaced by wary stares. "Good morning, Lucy. All packed already?" Katie asked in an exaggeratedly sweet voice. "Almost. But before I go, there's something I'd like to tell everyone." At that, I saw it. A flicker of unease crossing their faces. "Talk? About what? Now of all times. If you're here to ask for money, forget it. We're done taking care of you." Mrs. Hanson was the first to snap, her tone sharp and defensive. "It's not about money. It's about the future of this house." At that, Katie shot to her feet, visibly irritated. "The future? We are the future of this house, our new family. You have nothing to do with it anymore. Do you even know what day it is today?" Her outburst left my parents flustered and confused, glancing helplessly between us. "Is that really how you want to handle this?" I smiled faintly as I spoke, my voice unnervingly steady. Then Tom said, as if he were spitting the words out, "Lucy, this is pathetic. Just leave already, will you?" But I didn't waver, not even for a moment. On the contrary, the more emotional they become, the more I feel my heart turning icy and calm. Then, ding dong. The doorbell rang through the living room, sharp and commanding. Everyone turned toward the front door in confusion. Who could that be? Maybe a delivery. As they murmured among themselves, I walked toward the door, composed, deliberate. When I opened it, a middle-aged man stood there, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit. It was the man I had messaged the night before. My lawyer, Mr. Baker. He gave me a polite nod, then cast a cool, assessing glance into the living room. "Good morning, Miss Manning. I've arrived as scheduled." I invited him inside. Katie and the others stared, frowning in confusion. "Who's this guy?" Katie muttered. Mr. Baker stepped in front of the sofa, placed his leather briefcase on the table, and clicked open the clasps. Then, turning to everyone present, he introduced himself in a calm yet unmistakably authoritative voice that allowed no room for objection. "Good morning, everyone. My name is Baker, and I represent Miss Lucy Manning as her lawyer. I'm here today as her lawyer of record, to finalize matters regarding the property ownership." The words lawyer and property ownership froze the atmosphere in the living room instantly. My parents exchanged alarmed looks. Mr. and Mrs. Hanson frowned. Katie glanced between me and Mr. Baker, clearly struggling to grasp what was happening. "Ownership? What do you mean? This house belongs to Mom and Dad." Mr. Baker shook his head gently at Katie's trembling voice. "No, miss. That was true. Until 3 months ago." He drew a thick stack of documents from his briefcase and laid one sheet neatly on the table. 3 months ago, this property was foreclosed due to unpaid mortgage debts. It was seized by the bank and placed for public auction. And... He paused, meeting my eyes. I nodded slightly. The silent signal we had agreed upon. It was time to tell them the truth. The lawyer's next words detonated like a quiet bomb in the living room. "Foreclosed? An auction?" My parents went pale, their eyes darting nervously. They knew. Of course they knew. They had received multiple final notices from the bank months ago, warnings that this house was about to be repossessed. But they hadn't told anyone, not even Katie and Tom. Perhaps they wanted to save face, or maybe they just hoped the problem would disappear on its own. Either way, they'd hidden the truth, their own financial collapse, and deceived all of us. "Mom, Dad, is it true?" Katie shrieked, her voice cracking. My father finally spoke, his voice low and defeated. "Yes, it's true. But I thought we could work something out. I'd been talking to the bank." "Work something out?" Katie cried out in disbelief. "So what? This house belongs to someone else now? Where are we supposed to live?" Her panic-stricken face would have been almost comical if it weren't so pathetic. Up until a few minutes ago, these people had schemed to drive me out and claim this house for themselves. Yet they were now trembling at the thought of losing their own place to live. Tom and the Hansons finally seemed to grasp the gravity of the situation. Their faces turned ghostly pale as they glared accusingly at my parents, as if this were somehow their fault. Mr. Baker, however, remained perfectly composed, untouched by the chaos unfolding before him. His voice was calm and professional as he continued. "Yes, that's correct. The auction was carried out through proper legal procedures, entirely fair and transparent. The property was sold at a legitimate market value to its new owner." "And who's this new owner?" Mr. Hanson's voice trembled as he spoke, dry and cracking. All eyes were fixed on Mr. Baker's mouth. The silence was so intense that you could hear everyone holding their breath. Mr. Baker spoke slowly and clearly, leaving no room for doubt as he gave his answer. "The new owner of this house is..." He paused for a moment, then stepped back slightly beside me and extended his hand respectfully. "Here she is herself, Ms. Lucy Manning." At that moment, time stopped in the living room. Katie froze, her mouth hanging open. Tom collapsed onto the sofa, muttering, "No, no way." The Hansons let out a dry, disbelieving laugh, as if this were all some elaborate prank. My parents' expressions were the most complicated of all, a tangle of shock, confusion, and, faintly, relief. They'd narrowly escaped total loss. But in exchange, they now had to face the incomprehensible reality that the rightful owner of their home was the very daughter they had cast aside. The silence shattered when Katie suddenly burst into hysterical laughter. She pointed at me with a trembling finger and screamed, "That's a lie, it has to be. Lucy, owning this house? Don't make me laugh. She's just a boring office assistant at some real estate firm. There's no way she could afford this place on that pathetic salary." Her words carried all the contempt and dismissal they'd always held for me, the image of the dull, timid, insignificant sister they had constructed in their minds. I looked at her quietly, then smiled, a true, unforced smile. For the first time in years. "Oh, Katie, did you really think I was just an office assistant? It's true, I work at a real estate firm, but only so I can feel the market trends firsthand. My real work has been elsewhere, building assets quietly while you were too busy showing off your perfect life." Yes. While Katie and her friends were out brunching, shopping, and posting their curated happiness online, I was living frugally, saving every spare cent. For my future, I used nearly my entire salary as a down payment on a small studio apartment in the suburbs. That modest first investment became the seed that grew, property by property, into something far greater. As I spoke, Mr. Baker methodically laid out more documents from his briefcase, spreading them across the table. These are summaries of Miss Manning's current real estate portfolio. The list displayed 3 luxury apartment units within the city and several single-family rental homes in surrounding areas, each with its address and market valuation neatly documented. A stunned silence fell again. None of them had even imagined that I held this much. And these are asset verification statements, along with confirmation of Miss Manning's VIP status from multiple financial institutions. Within the real estate investment community, she is regarded as a rising and highly capable investor. My father picked up one of the documents, scanning the figures repeatedly, his hands trembling. My mother covered her mouth, speechless. Finally, Mr. Baker placed one last sheet on top, an official property deed. At the bottom, printed clearly and unmistakably, was my name, Lucy Manning, registered owner. This can't be happening. Katie stared at the paper, her voice cracking as she sank helplessly to the floor. The world she had built, one where she reigned supreme, was collapsing in front of her eyes. On the floor, she began to wail like a child. "This isn't fair. It's not fair. I'm the one who got married. I'm the one who built this family. I take care of Mom and Dad, and Tom's parents, too. I've done so much more for this house than you ever have. So why should you own it?" Her words, drenched in self-pity and entitlement, barely reached me. I felt nothing. I just said coldly, "Contribute? Do you mean spending our parents' savings? Or pushing this house into foreclosure with your irresponsibility? Or inviting your husband's parents to move in and treating this home like your personal kingdom? Ownership doesn't work that way, Katie. It's not something measured by sentiment." Katie's mouth opened, but no words came out. Then Tom, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, finally spoke, his voice tentative, oily. "Wait, Lucy. Come on, we're family, right? No need to make this all about legal papers and ownerships. We can talk, can't we?" His sudden humility was nauseating. A man who'd mocked me hours earlier was now groveling at my feet. I glanced at him, then looked around the room at every face. The same faces that had once watched me pack my bags without a word. "Yes, you're right about one thing, Tom. This is a family matter, which is exactly why we need to clarify, right here and now, who truly belongs in this home." Then I turned toward Mr. Baker and gave him a slight nod. He nodded and pulled out the final stack of papers from his briefcase. It was a rental agreement. "Well then, everyone, these are the terms from your new landlord, Miss Lucy Manning, regarding the future of this house." Mr. Baker began placing copies of the agreement in front of each of them. "There are 2 options," he said, tapping the contract on the table lightly with his index finger. "The first option is to sign this lease and continue living here, with Miss Manning as your landlord." At the word landlord, Mr. and Mrs. Hanson grimaced. Katie glanced back and forth between the papers and me, disbelief written all over her face. Mr. Baker, unfazed by their reactions, continued calmly, "Of course, rent will be charged. The amount listed here has been calculated based on the fair market value for this neighborhood. Entirely reasonable. Utilities will be your own responsibility. Any remodeling or major alterations without Miss Manning's approval are strictly prohibited. Other than that, you'll follow the standard terms of a rental agreement." Mr. Hanson looked down at the document and suddenly exclaimed, "What?" It was probably the rent amount, far beyond what he'd imagined. That was the moment they realized just how comfortable and privileged their lives had been, living here all this time without paying a single cent. "And the second option?" Mr. Baker paused, then pointed toward the calendar on the wall, "is not to live here. In that case, exactly 2 weeks from today will be your move-out date. You'll need to gather all your belongings and vacate the premises by then. Naturally, no relocation or housing expenses will be covered." I spoke up, reinforcing his words. "So, what will it be? Sign the lease and stay, or pack up and leave in 2 weeks? The choice is entirely yours." It was a cruelly simple, yet perfectly fair ultimatum. I folded my arms and silently studied their faces. Right then, they were being confronted with the exact same reality they had once tried to impose on me. The living room fell into a silence so heavy it felt as though time had stopped. Everyone stared in disbelief, at the contracts before them and at Baker's calm, unyielding expression. The first to recover was Mrs. Hanson. She screeched, "This is an outrage. Do you know who we are?" "My son is your brother-in-law, and you expect us to pay rent? How dare you?" "That's right. You could only buy this house because we supported Katie and Tom. We kept this family together. You should be thanking us, not throwing us out." Beside him, Mr. Hanson also began spouting some incoherent reasoning. Their desperate protests only made me look at them more coolly. They still didn't understand. They were no longer even guests in this house, just illegal occupants clinging to what wasn't theirs. My parents looked completely shaken. "Lucy, please stop this. We're family," my mother pleaded, her voice trembling. But those words held no weight. They had agreed to drive me out, and now that the same fate loomed over them, they suddenly remembered the word family. The hypocrisy was staggering. Katie and Tom exchanged worried whispers, probably trying to figure out some way to salvage the situation, but there was no escape left for any of them. I said, calmly but firmly, "I'm afraid you don't have the luxury of time. If you don't decide today, I can file for a court-ordered eviction. Once that happens, you'll have a permanent legal record as unlawful occupants." That statement was the final warning. Legal action and the stain of a court record was a threat powerful enough to crush their emotional defiance. The Hansons, who had been shouting moments before, fell silent. At last, they seemed to understand that their anger and pride meant nothing before the law. In the thick, suffocating quiet, the first to pick up a pen was, unexpectedly, my father. He scanned the papers with trembling hands, let out a long sigh of resignation, and signed his name. My mother followed, her shoulders slumped. They knew they had no real choice if they wanted to keep a roof over their heads. "No, I won't do it, never!" Katie cried, shaking her head furiously. "Then what? You want to live on the street with our parents? We've got no savings, Katie, none." When Tom spoke in a forceful tone, he twisted his face in frustration, and in the end, roughly signed the contract, tears streaming down his face. The last ones remaining were the Hansons. Mr. Hanson, his pride clearly wounded, sat glaring at the contract, his face flushed crimson. Beside him, Mrs. Hanson whispered anxiously, "Darling, if you don't sign, they'll really make us leave. We've already sold the other house. We have nowhere else to go." At that, Mr. Hanson slumped forward as if all the strength had drained from his body. With a heavy sigh, he picked up the pen and signed. And so, the 6 people who, just hours ago, had tried to drive me out of my home, acting as if they ruled it, all became my tenants. Mr. Baker gathered the signed copies of the lease, checked them carefully, and gave a satisfied nod. "The agreement is now officially in effect. As of today, you will all be living in this house under the rules of your new landlord, Miss Lucy Manning. The first rent payment is due on the 1st of next month. Please be sure not to delay." I pointed to the stack of contracts they had just signed and added firmly, "You are all tenants now. Mom and Dad, as well as Katie and Tom, will continue living in the main house. Mr. and Mrs. Hanson will stay in the guest house as they do now. Each household will pay their own rent to me, separately and responsibly. Understood? That division was the first wedge driven to sever their toxic codependency. No one could hide behind anyone else anymore. Even after Baker left, the air in the living room remained heavy as lead. The new tenants sat in silence, slumped on the sofa like hollow shells, unable to process the reality they had just signed into. I gave them a brief glance and turned toward the stairs. There was no reason for me to linger here any longer. But then a faint voice called out from behind me. "Lucy." I turned to see my mother, her face tight with worry. "Are you going somewhere?" "Of course I won't be living here." At my firm reply, everyone looked up in surprise. "Then why did you even buy this house?" Katie demanded, her voice sharp with accusation. I slowly scanned the living room. This was the irreplaceable place where I had been born and raised, filled with countless memories. Yet at the same time, it was also the place that had deeply wounded my heart and tried to strip away my dignity. I bought this house because I wanted to protect it, that's all. Our family was never what you'd call close, but I couldn't stand the thought of this place, my home, ending up in the hands of strangers. That doesn't mean I want to live here with you. I reached into my bag and placed a single key on the table. It was the key to the new apartment I had viewed just yesterday. I'm moving into a condo, about 30 minutes from here by car. I'll manage this property remotely as your landlord. If anything comes up, contact the management company. Not me. Do not reach out to me directly. Those words were meant to draw a clear final line between us. We were no longer simply family, just a landlord and her tenants. Nothing more. My father spoke hesitantly. "Lucy, about the rent." He faltered, searching for words. "We simply can't afford to pay that much every month." I couldn't help but sigh in disbelief. Even then, they were still trying to appeal to my sympathy. "That's not my concern," I said coldly. "The 6 of you can figure it out. The Hansons, Dad, Mom, you're all still capable of working. And Katie, if you think you can keep playing the stay-at-home princess forever, you're gravely mistaken." At that, the Hansons and Katie glared at me with undisguised resentment, but they had no words left to fight back. Without another glance, I went upstairs, grabbed my suitcase, and left the house. Months passed. Life in my new apartment has been astonishingly peaceful. For the first time, I could spend my days exactly as I wished. In silence, in freedom, with no one to answer to. I focused on my work as a real estate investor, steadily expanding my portfolio and living a contented life. Despite all their earlier complaints about having no money, my family had managed to pay their rent every month. On time. Then, about 6 months after I moved out, an email arrived from my father. "Everyone in the family wants to talk to you. Could you come back to the house just once?" Cautious but curious, I went to the house at the time he specified. My first time setting foot there in half a year. All 6 of them were waiting in the living room, dressed neatly, their faces drawn tight with tension. "Lucy, I'm so sorry." My father's voice trembled, but there was genuine sincerity in it. He told me that the months after I left home had been nothing short of hell. The constant exhaustion from unfamiliar labor had turned the atmosphere in the house bitter and tense. But if they wanted to keep a roof over their heads, everyone had to work. One night, Katie had murmured, "I never realized how hard it was to earn just this little money." Seeing Katie break down in tears, my father found himself saying, almost without thinking, "Lucy built hundreds of times more wealth than this. On her own." In that moment, they finally grasped the true weight of what I had achieved, and how foolish, how dependent they had been. From that night on, the shouting and blame disappeared, and slowly they began trying to rebuild themselves as a family. After my father spoke, my mother, Katie, and even the Hansons and Tom each offered their own apologies to me. They weren't asking for money, nor putting on an act to earn sympathy. Their words carried real remorse, a genuine acknowledgement of the harm they had done. I was too stunned to speak, but as I looked at their faces, I could see it. The hardship of those past 6 months had truly changed them. I took a slow breath and said quietly, "I can't just erase the past. The wounds won't ever fully disappear, but I can see that you're trying to face your mistakes and change." A faint smile touched my lips. As your landlord, I can recognize that you've become responsible tenants. And as a family, maybe it's time we start over. At those words, tears of relief welled up in my parents' eyes. It might not have been a perfect happy ending, but it was, without a doubt, a new beginning. That day when I almost lost everything, what I was truly protecting wasn't just a house. It was the final stronghold, a place where a broken family could, at last, learn how to stand again.